Okay, so for week 10, Learn Together, we are continuing um, what you don't normally, I guess, in this course, although he's mentioned it, Andrew has, and I have, but I just want you to get used to it because once you start understanding how these CRUD operations relate to everything that we've done so far, I think the easier it'll help you organize what you're doing for your dev and, of course, for this Learn Together this week. So I just brought it up because I wanted to just give you the actual Wikipedia entry. So create, read, update, and delete. Okay. So this week we're really working on update, although I realized I needed to do delete and I will. So when you think about our data, our decision form, right? Our what we've been coding all along, which I think I've only looked at David so far, and he also did a major rewrite for week 9. So in week 9, this is our classic create, right? So we have a form, we're actually giving it some data, right? And in this case, we're using the input on the form in order to send those user inputs to our code, right? And then once we hit submit, this is the create. Now we've learned a lot about the create at this point. We've learned not only create but also read, because once this data is created, it's saved into local storage. It's also saved in our computer's memory, and then we render it to the screen. So we've done the C and the R in just this last time. Now I'm talking about week 9, not week 10 yet, right? So the update and delete. Now, some of you may have implemented delete in week 9. I actually had intended to, but I ran out of time. So I was like, okay, I suspect because we've seen how to do that, how to write the code for deleting an entry. For my particular case, I wasn't as interested, right? So you could definitely make a case whether based on your decision code you wanted to. So the update. So in this case, here's where week 10 comes into play, okay? And now this is different. This is, even though it looks the same, it is actually, there's my week 9, here's my week 10. And this week 10 is different in several ways. Okay, so yes, we do the traditional create, right? We give it our inputs. We say I have an unplanned event. In this case, I want to say it's Monday. I hope I don't have a breakpoint, but if I do, no biggie. But the first thing you'll notice is that there's no data. I had actually cleared out all the data in the local storage before I ran this, right? So first I give a message. So I did some filtering. It's kind of what we saw in the end here, where Andrew was kind of towards the end actually writing some sorting function to actually use that drop down, which we had coded up for the notes. So I leaned into some of that concept just to create a message if there is no objects in my array. Okay. Now, when I hit submit here, I guess I do have a breakpoint, but by the way, hopefully you know if that ever happens and you don't want to use it, you just hit the play button and it plays all the way through. Okay, so the first thing is that last week, if you missed this piece, because I realized after thinking about it, I actually needed to be more clear. Some of you on your form, once you do another entry, you actually then erase your first one, and you don't want to do that in the way that we're trying to code this up. Okay. Oh, sorry, I meant to do that. Just noise over there bothering me. So in this case, what you want, and I'll just simulate this idea because we're still talking about the create now, and I'll get into the details of what you're doing different for this one. But, and I just want you to know is, right, you want to have multiple entries that you're rendering to the screen. That's the idea of where we're heading, right? And I understand sometimes it can make sense only to keep the last one, but I just want you to know, even though it may not make sense for your decision, I want you to have multiple entries. So if I wanted to come over here and look at them, right, for me, it's called morning task. And there I can see now this is the one in my local memory or in my system memory. And then I would look at local storage to see the ones that were actually stored persistently on my system. Okay, so these, again, just reviewing, if you missed this piece last week, the create and the read, you do want to have multiple entries. But again, that's the stuff we did. So this week we needed to do an update. So I gave my particular decision path some thought. I actually do sit and think about this stuff. And, my Learn Together is really coding that I'm doing by considering my particular decision path. And last week I talked about the idea of stackable functions. I had a great meeting with a student talking about how they had coded like one function call at a time for a decision, but you really want to have stackable functions where you're making one output decision, right, based on multiple inputs. So in this case, I thought about what would I want the user to edit, right? So I have the output of what they can do. I have a message to them. And I was like, because I'm really thinking of this as more of a data collection. And here's why is like, if I think about doing this, I could over time build what's called a machine learning model. So to better predict my morning task. So I kind of took it to a different way, but it doesn't really matter. It's just my way of thinking about it. But what I had to do was think about what would I want them to edit about this. Like, would I want them to be able to edit the time, edit the gym time, any of these things? And I thought, no, I really wouldn't, although you totally could. Right? When we're looking at Andrew's notes and his to-dos, remember and I emphasized this last week, he's only entering data and then presenting that data back to the screen. We are taking it a step beyond that. So for my particular decision, right, my data collection on my morning task suggestions, what I ended up doing was creating this additional page for the edit. Okay, this is what we saw, right? This is what we saw at the beginning of this section that you just completed this week, was how to create that edit page. Now, I've had students in the past actually, instead of creating a separate page, do a little digging, and they figured out a way to do what's called an in-place edit, which is fine. I don't really suggest it, especially if you're new to JavaScript. Just create this page that you see him do in the notes, right? The edit page. Now, the syncing across tabs, I think is great to see how to do. I don't think it's as important. And then I will end with just a bit of discussion about dates, but most of our focus is really in here because repeating back, circling back, you want to be able to update that entry. Okay. Now I just realized I was talking about it, delete in a way that I will show you in just a minute. So for your particular decision, you have to figure out what this is you want to implement, right, for your update, and then ultimately also for your dates. Okay, so for mine, what I did is I rendered a link and I said, rate this suggestion. And now what this code's going to do is when I click on rate this suggestion, then it's going to take me to a new page. This is again, the equivalent of the edit. Now, when we did it in notes, I called mine rate because that made more sense. Also, understanding how to grab that UUID, or first how to use it when you create the A link, is important. And then what I did, because in this case, my rate code, you want to create a separate JavaScript file, you want to create a separate HTML file. And then what I did here is just what he did with his note, is I then grabbed that individual suggestion. Okay. Now, one of the things I also did different than last week is I ended up saving my inputs so that I could use them now to tell the user the inputs for this suggestion. Here they were, right? So I'm not giving the user the option to update it. I'm just telling them, hey, here's what we base this decision on, right? Actually, I should have actually told him the decision. That would have been good. I probably will do that, right? So in this case, what the update I wanted to do was twofold. First, I wanted to give them the option to tell me, right, how good was this suggestion? Was this really good? And I gave them a rating scale. Was it perfect? Was it good? Was it fair? Was it bad? Okay. So the other thing I did is I validated this. Remember, any inputs at this point you need to validate one way or the other. So if I just try to submit, I was able to reuse that code I had done from last week, basically to give an error message. You need to select the rating. Okay. So if I go back, now I haven't rated it yet. So if I go back, it still re-renders the page, right? So I have two listing here. And so what I do though, and here's my update, is once I do select, and this was the one for Monday, once I do say, you know what, that was a perfect suggestion. When I hit my rating, then what happens is, and actually it was on that page, is that once the suggestion has been rated, it is no longer appearing on your main suggested listings, right? Because my idea here is to actually kind of go into a data collection mode where the user uses the app, right? Then they rate how well the suggestion did, and then that suggestion goes away. Now there's some work I still need to do here. What I need to do is actually give the user some information about how well, the rating, some kind of output from that. I definitely want to do that. That sounds fun, right? And then just give them a way to see those older options as well. So I can definitely see a line of like statistics and way to filter this data here. Okay. Okay, so how this looks in the writing. And I wanted to explain it because when you read this, it's going to be like, I wanted you to have context. So, and by the way, I started with this for last week. If you didn't get the multiple objects rendered right into the DOM, then you need to do that this week, right? Not just the last one. So, because I added that late, I'm going to add that one to here or give that another go. But here's the main crux of what you want to do, right? Is to implement an update feature for your decision output. Some kind of updates. You get to determine how you want to do that. I want to see in your output is a way that you give that update there. Okay. So, and I had said here, and again, hopefully this makes more sense now that you've seen it, is you can either allow the user to update the decision inputs, right? What I was showing here. I didn't allow them, but I did show them to them. So I did or allow them to edit something related to the process data. So this, again, is the main part. Now, the last thing, and actually I need to do this, but at this point it should be relatively easy, right? So use Moment.js in your capturing of user input at a minimum, right? Just implement, and you can do the created at, you could even do the updated at, that'd be perfect too as well, right? And attempt to use it in the rendering of the data into the DOM. Right. So, but at least by minimum, right? Get some more experience just implementing again Moment.js. Okay. All right. So, trying to see here. And let me just show you because there's a lot I had open here. But my structure for this was I added the rate, right? So it's my rate page. Now I did this actually rate two ways. One is I dynamically rendered, and let me just show you my rate.js, is I ended up writing a function. So the top part of this looks very similar to what we saw where you go out, you get based on the hash substring. So you pull it from the browser's URL, you go and look for it. If you don't find the suggestion, then you go back to the index. But the rest of this I did in my own way of thinking about it, is I dynamically showed the inputs, and I should say rendered the inputs. That would actually be better. And this is where I was dynamically creating this output here. And then what I did is I ended up doing a form event listener. So I actually coded into the page through the HTML. Now I could have done this dynamically, but honestly, I was running out of time. And so, but I just wanted you to see it both ways because it's actually a little more challenging when you're first writing dynamic output, right? So this is not dynamic output, but when you're looking at it here, it is because you're through JavaScript dynamically creating all those elements. So I just leaned into the idea of actually hard coding what I knew I needed for that suggestion. And then I wrote the validation code on the event listener. And then I just saved, I updated that rating, right? And then what I did to change the filter so that once, let's just do this, right? So now there's no suggestions here. Right. So what I did there is very much what I said we'd already seen, where I did a filtered suggestions by running. And in this case, I just did a filter. And if it didn't have a rating, right, then I let it go through. Otherwise, I didn't want to show it. But that's just the beginnings of what I'm going to be working on here. Okay, last thing I will say here is, yes, I know I still need to do this last part, which is at the minimum. And then at this point, I haven't done a video for week 9 of my code. But if you would like to see me walk through a more detailed description of my code, please let me know. I'm not sure who benefits from that. So if I hear students ask me out on Discord, or if you shoot me an email, right, it's better. Like if you've, and matter of fact, I think I'll actually mention this in the attendance for this week. as well. Maybe that's a better place. All right. Hope this helps you. Talk to you later.